Now, this is a continuation of our treatment of economic justice, but I'm going to try to do it from a little bit different angle. And by that, I mean that the focus is on how we ourselves uh, try to act justly in the world. So this isn't about changing political systems or being concerned with issues of social institutions that need to be put in place in order for and the economic sphere to be more equitable. But perhaps that's part of it, but that's not the focus here per se. So I really want to avoid trying to fall into any of the liberal or conservative, I want to say, modes of thinking. We're trying to come at this from a different point of view from the individual itself. Now, a little caveat as we move on here. Now, when you hear things like a civilization of love, I would think it's cliche. It's almost as if somebody says, all we need is more love in the world. Who's going to disagree with that? But it's very difficult to know exactly what's meant by that, isn't it? Because it isn't cliche in the sense that we do kind of wish that everybody would belong. We do wish everybody would love each other, but we're not really talking about exactly what love means. And we could be agreeing to something where two people or three or more, who knows how many different people have varying understandings of what exactly love is. So it is cliche, but it also speaks to, I think, something interior within every human person that we want to see everyone get along, and we just wish it were so. We know that the minute that power gets involved, one person typically uses it over that of another. So for somebody who loves the Beatles, I'm not here to ruin the song for you, although I will criticize it. But we all know the song, Imagine. Now, there's a lot of different varying criticism on this, right? I don't, some people that are hyper religious find it offensive. I do not. Um, some people that, profess no religion use it as a means to say the evils of all religion and how things should be if we just get rid of religion. I tend to hit the more philosophical tone on this, that it's a little nihilistic for me. I'm not quite sure exactly what it's supposed to mean. In other words, if we take away all the things that those people deem important, then I'm not quite sure what exactly we're going to find worth living for in the end. So just to condense a few of the phrases from the song, he says, imagine there's no heaven and imagine there's no hell. I want to stop there for just a minute. And I went through great pains in this course up now to let us know that these are not just some eternal destinations, that it's not, our lives should not be governed by some eternal reward or eternal punishment. And I realized that regardless of the reality of these things, doing away with them doesn't necessarily leave something good in its wake. Right? And I'll talk more about that. But it says there's no heaven, there's no hell, countries, no possessions, no need for greed or hunger, for a brotherhood of all men, nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. And what's attractive about it is because we tend to think, and it sounds sensible on the surface, that if we can get rid of the things that divide us, then we're not going to have divisions. But that's bad logic, because everybody needs division. It's just how we divide it, right? In other words, we couldn't have good if we weren't able to divide it away from evil. So we can't get rid of moral qualification and therefore think that whatever is left in its wake is some neutral goodness. It's not true. So we have to be very careful that, getting rid of religion, which does divide, but it divides because of boundaries that are necessary, in the same way that things that are good and bad are necessary, and they become divisions. Now, I realize that some people could and have made the argument that so many of the evils in the world are caused by religion. And then the conclusion from that is, therefore, we should have no religion. But I'm going to go again, and again, this is not theological arguments. I'm trying to make rational arguments for you. That too is bad logic, because the fact of it is that how many people in the world lie? We have politicians that lie. We have professors that lie. We have students that lie. We have parents that lie. We have all kinds of people that lie. So do we do away with truth? I mean, if we did away with truth, then there wouldn't be any lies. But we wouldn't want that either, right? So we have to watch exactly how we understand this. And to make my point clear, what if we did try to rephrase this in terms of truth, right? Imagine there's no truth. So we don't have to pursue it, right? There's no schools, there's no tests, nothing. There's no need for any work or achievement. We're just a brotherhood of man. We don't have claims we have to worry about exaggerating, but we also don't have to reason. Um, we wouldn't like that world, right? So I find something, it's not offensive. I just find something intellectually lacking in what Lenin has proposed there. And again, I'm not trying to bash a song if you like it. It's something attractive to the idea of it. But I guess my point is that what's attractive about it is only attractive if it's very vague. And if we all kind of think it is what we think it is. The minute that we would start trying to parse out exactly how we think this brotherhood of man should go without possessions and everything else, you're going to see the same divisions arise that were there in the first place. So the overarching point on this then is that the minute you disconnect love from truth, you're left with nothing but a sentiment. All right. I mean, if truth is not this, or if truth is not that, and if we're going to say that truth and in this way love, if love is anything, then it's really nothing. It's just what you think it is. That's what I think it is. And it could be more subjective, which is why, again, I don't like the use of love in slogans or in cliches, because we don't really never narrow down exactly what we're talking about when we say love. So again, the minute we disconnect love from any truth, all we're left with is a sentiment. And sentiments are entirely and purely subjective. It's only what you think it is and only what I think it is. If that's how we're going to understand love, then we cannot build a civilization on love. Then it is cliche. And if it's not cliche, it's empty. Now, that's what I've given you is not a religious argument. It's a rational argument. But I think it holds. I don't know what the counter to it is. Think about it. If you know, when I'm going to leave time at the end here for discussions, think now like what piqued your interest or what you might say. Well, I think this or I think that. You're more than welcome to chime in anytime, but I'm going to make sure I leave room at the end for that. Now, I'm going to give you some statistics, and I think I don't think this one's the video per se. No, it isn't. We'll do that next. I am not an economist, and I know so little about stocks. You know, when you watch the news, which I rarely do, but they always kind of like ticker tape across the bottom there. Stocks go up and stocks go down, and there's bulls and there's bears, and I couldn't even really talk much more beyond that. It just seems like such a fickle thing to me. It seems like it has nothing to do strictly with supply and demand. It has to do with what people perceive as needed or not needed, and what they're trying to figure out what's going to happen in the future. Okay, that being said. So anyway, I do understand. I'm not so naive to believe that just what happens in the stock market is going to affect me somehow, even though I don't own stock. I realize that it's still going to affect me. When you look at stock ownership, and this is of 2016, look at who exactly owns stock as a percentage in our world. 1% of the people own 40%, top 20%, I'm sorry, the top 10% of the people in the United States own over 80% of the stock. That's extraordinary. Now, before you start trying to, pin this into a liberal or conservative view, this is an evil. I don't think this is an evil that anybody has perpetuated as, with pure intent. There's not some twisted person up there with, twirling his mustache, figuring how can we screw as many people as possible. But we do have individuals that have kind of lost sight of the common good. We'll talk about that later. So you look at the bottom, 80% of the people own less than 7% of the stock. We're going to see in the video that you watch next that statistics even become more desperate as we look at the difference between the upper and the lower class. So something has happened. Now, I don't think, unless, you are just such a crass utilitarianism that you think, hey, it's mine, I'll get it. And by the way, nobody's sitting here saying that that stuff was taken illegally. Okay, that's not the claim anybody's making. But I can't imagine somebody looking at this and saying there's something not right about this. It doesn't have to be even. Okay, we're not talking about communism here or classic socialism, right? This doesn't have to be even. Nobody expects it to be even. But to be this far off, it's like it makes us, at least, if nothing else, ask the question, well, what's going on, right? So I'm going to play the video now, but if you would open up your link, because you're not going to hear any sound. So I'll let it play through 6 or 7 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll chat. Okay. So let's not get hung up on the terms they were using there. It's not that important. And also, let's just be very clear here that we're not talking about from a Catholic social justice standpoint that the people in the lower just somehow just have grab and have access to the monies that are in the higher. And the other way about this is also not just for somebody to say, well, if it's such a problem and there's such a bad thing, then why don't you just try to do it so you achieve that, right? So participating in the very injustice you're complaining about is no better than simply saying, I want to fix the injustice by taking what the other person has. So the Catholic social teaching is going to come at it from a different point of view, all right? Now, that was, and I realized that statistic was 11 years old. So it's changed. I doubt that it's been fixed. So let's just say that it probably still holds its particular point. But we have a big complaint against those who are the 1% or the top 10% in the United States. Let's look at it in the world now. Because and since we have like 30 some people in this classroom, if we were in the physical building like normally at St. Joe's, we can like divide this by a third, 30%, let's say, so that we can actually get a real feel for, how does this affect us and who are these people? So worldwide, only 77% have shelter and 61 are substandard. So 23 have none. So that'd be like if we're in a room of 30, that would be like saying 7 people have no place whatsoever to call shelter. We'd have to be looking at that. In other words, I'm trying to say that if we can make a lot of complaints in the United States about the privilege that some people have, the top 10%, what I'm trying to say now is that everybody in the United States is already part of that privilege. In other words, if you have any change in your pocket and $5 on a dresser somewhere, you're the top 10% in the world, all right? 13 people out of 100 have no access to clean water. 22 have no electricity. 18 can't read or write. How about that? Only 7 have some degree in education, and by some degree, that counts high school. So we should be feeling pretty privileged about ourselves. 15 are malnourished. 1 is actually dying of starvation out of 100, while 21 are overweight. And those figures for living on less than $2 or $1 a day have already been adjusted. So that would be not, well, if I live in an undeveloped country, $2 may not be so bad. No, that's if you were in the United States, you'd have to live on $2 a day, which you can't do. I mean, I don't even know how you would eat. I'm not sure what you would eat, right? That type of thing. So this is the situation, and it's unjust. And the fact that it's unjust has created a lack of peace amongst us. So if we want to increase peace, we have to figure out a way to increase justice. And the Catholic Church is going to resist both extremes. You don't just simply take from the rich. And you don't just simply say, well, then I want to be like them, so I therefore won't complain myself. So, and the whole goal here, at least with this particular class today, in this course overall, is that the change has to be something that comes within the individual, not from the system. Because it doesn't matter, even if we did go in there and grabbed everybody's money, right, and said we're just going to divide it, and everybody now is going to get, I don't know how much it would be, everybody's going to get $1,000. How long do you think it would be before some people would have more and people would have less? It wouldn't take too long, right? So anyway. So from a Christian standpoint then, Catholic social teaching says our mission, our Christian mission, or remember I said mission solidarity, the fact that we're going to talk about solidarity again shortly, the fact that we are all interdependent, as Christians, it's going to be absolutely hollow if we don't find a way to address these inequalities. It's part of it. So the way to do this is through grace, but grace has an internal and an external effect, right? So remember, grace is not something that you collect. It's not good to think that you get grace or that God gives you grace. It's not that those things aren't true. It's just that the language doesn't really help us understand what's happening. Remember this theosis that we become more like him? Well, the whole idea of us becoming more like him is us for us to grow in grace. So from a Christian standpoint, and if you're not Christian, you can understand this at least, to grow in grace is to be more Christ-like. So it's an interior change. That's the internal effect of grace on the human person. But the effect on the human person, if it doesn't have some outward display, then you can't even really say there's been an effect. Or what would the effect have been for? Christ does not try to transform individuals, so they're transformed. It's how he transforms the world. So that internal transformation via grace, and nothing is done without grace, according to Catholic theology, then that has to then go out into the world. And into the world, then, we have to find ways to establish external justice. Now, could this be done through systems? Well, sure. Could it be done through movements? Sure. But the easiest way to do it is just through our lives, right? We make decisions all the time. There's things that I will do and there's things I won't do. And it doesn't matter what my employer tells me. It doesn't matter what they say. I'm not going against my conscience. In other words, let's try to be the heroes that people that are heroes in our lives we hold up to. The people that walked off the bus, the people that said, no, I'm not going to do that. People said, no, I'm going to form a union. I'm not going to be put up for this. Or we're not going to put up a tyranny. I mean, all these various things that we hold as ideals, we have to find ways with internal justice to reach those externally. Okay. Which then in Catholic social teaching, the overall and arching concern is not necessarily to organize. Although, again, I feel like I'm just reiterating it. There's nothing wrong with that, and it may lead to that. But that's not the immediate effect. What it's meant to do is to challenge and to guide and to form the individuals so they themselves then will go then and transform the world, right? So if we go back and talk about a civilization of love, that might, first of all, if it sounds ideal, it might just find over daunting. How on earth do you do that, right? So maybe we should not worry about a civilization of love. We should just worry about a family of love. Now that we're capable of, right? Let's get to some definition on a working love as far as like meaning the good of willing the good of the other. In other words, if we get to the point where we're doing something for the other person, regardless of any benefit that we get, so there's never an ulterior motive. We want the other person to achieve the common good, which I'll talk about in a minute, in the same way that we can. All of a sudden now we could do that within our family. There's no way that that's outside of our scope. And if everybody did that, which I know immediately we're thinking, well, nobody's not going to do that. But everybody's not our concern. We're only our own concern, right? So you think of when Jesus met the young rich ruler. Remember, we talked about this in class when he asked, I mean, we're always saying, again, I don't like the idea of going to heaven. It's a bad way to phrase it. But when he said, teacher, what must I do to have eternal life? The answer was pretty simple. First of all, that was the question. And the answer was, give everything you have and come follow me. But we're desperate to spiritualize that because we're so concerned that it's going to require us to give not just out of our want, not just out of our excess, but maybe out of our need. So even think of the prayer, the Our Father, when we get to the point, give us this day our daily bread. That word daily, how many times how many times have you just buzzed by that? Why doesn't it say monthly? Why doesn't it say yearly? Why doesn't it say, Lord, give me enough bread that I can survive for the next decade? It says daily. In other words, there's a two-pronged thing. People that have financial means typically have a way to protect themselves from tragedy and disparity that others don't. That often leads to a sense of not fulfillment as much, but self-reliance. So what Christ is trying to do through there is like, if you really want to follow me, then give everything. Because at that point, then I know that you're going to rely on me. Now, again, before that, you think that's cliche. Remember that he's not down here physically. The only way we can rely on him is through others, which brings me to the next part here, in a sense. So when we talk about the common good, I'll give you a definition. The common good is that total sum of conditions that allows us as human beings to flourish. That's a little truncated, but I'll give it to you again. The common good is that total sum of conditions that allows us as human beings to flourish. So this includes, economic sphere, the moral sphere, of course, it's nothing separated from that. Racial and ethnic good. Healthcare is a basic good. Now we can talk about to what degree it is, and that's not an advocacy per se for some national healthcare system, but it's an argument that everybody has to have equal access to equal care. So if we won't get into the discussion on how that can be achieved. So healthcare is a common good. Education is a common good. How we determine what is or is not a common good is think back to what we came up with as far as our natural inclinations. We have an inclination to do good and avoid evil. We have an inclination to preserve our life. We have an inclination to pursue truth. We have an inclination to live in relationality. All those things then form duties. We have a duty to preserve our life. We have a duty to pursue truth, education. We have a duty to live in relations. That can include anything from unions to just families. Then we have rights that enshrine those duties, right? So all of this stems from the common good. So if something is good for the human person and allows us to flourish, then it has to be something that's covered underneath the umbrella of Catholic social teaching. Which then brings us to this seamless garment theory, which for many, I would say, hyper-militant Roman Catholics is like a almost like a buzzword of something that's trying to dilute certain truths. Let me explain. In other words, the seamless garment theory says that if you care about the unborn, good, you should also care about the immigrant equally. If you care about, you know, how much people have for a minimum wage or a living wage, wonderful. You should also care about those people that are in prison, particularly the ones on their sentence to death. In other words, there's no way to separate all these issues. They all, whether it's economic, social, cultural, they all impinge on the moral sphere, and you can't separate those. Now, the reason why some people are opposed to this is because you have to watch the extreme. We can't flatten it out and pretend that they are all simply equal. Okay, you have to be concerned with them all, and you can't be concerned with one without the other. But you also can't try to make the claim that I'm concerned with the minimum wage, and that's the equivalent of euthanasia. We understand that those are not so, but we're also not going to make up a false dichotomy that says I can't be opposed to euthanasia and also be for a person making a living wage. No dichotomy between those two things. So what the seamless garment then does is it gives us a unified moral system where all these various spheres of activity of the human person are brought under the umbrella of morality. None of them are outside of that, okay? So that's just something to keep in the back of your mind. And the reason is, and this is a claim the Catholic Church makes, is that if anything, I don't care if we're talking about immigration, if we're talking about issues with abortion, if we're talking about issues with the economy, the minute that any time a human life is considered cheap in one of those areas, it's eventually not going to be held sacred in all the other. And then all of our lives become in jeopardy. So if you want one of these ideas that what affects one affects the all, somehow, some way, you know, we talk about trickle down economics, which the Catholic Church is not a big supporter of, right? You don't want to have trickle down morality either. You can't pretend that it only affects some people and doesn't affect the others. So we have to find a way to make sure that life's considered valuable in all these spheres. Find a way to hold those in tension without flattening them out and pretending that they're all on equal, I don't want to say on equal footing, okay? Now, one of the ways to do this, and if you have any concerns or just questions as to where does the Catholic Church fall in terms of capitalism and socialism, and again, I'm not here to define those, but how they're generally understood, you know, as liberalism and conservatism, you're going to find that they don't fit the Catholic Church doesn't really fit a category. It almost doesn't allow you to fit a category. I'm going to give you a definition for subsidiarity, and then I'm going to explain it. And I'm going to show you then how it doesn't fit either of those categories. Subsidiarity is this idea that the larger community should not interfere in the inner life of a smaller community. But always be ready to give aid when necessary. Okay, so the larger community should not interfere in the inner life of the smaller or lower community. Should always be ready to give aid when necessary. And just so you understand, part of that is the lower community is not independent of the larger community. So let me give you an idea. If we're going to talk about education, the federal government, now we live in a federal country, so states have power. We don't have 50 countries, we have 50 states that are federally. We got to keep that in consideration, even now. And I'm not trying to fall into a position. We talk about who's given aid or not given aid for particular issues with COVID-19. Subsidiarity would fall into that. There's a lot of responsibility the federal government has. Also, a lot of responsibility the state government has, and you just against each other. Let me do it with education. It's easy to understand. The Federal Department of Education is under no way or means would they be able to tell what your local high school that you went to should do or should not do that's best for the community. How would they know that? We live in such a pluralistic and diverse society, and even states different from one to the other, and within states. If we just say in Pennsylvania, first of all, the federal government would not know what's best for Pennsylvania. It couldn't. Pennsylvania government here in Harrisburg is going to know what's best. But even within Pennsylvania, the needs of people in North Philly are not the same as the needs of the people in Potter County. The people that live in Erie don't have the same needs of the people that live down in Adams County near Gettysburg. How could they? So they have to defer to the local communities. Those local communities are going to know what's best for their educational system. But they can't do everything on their own. So what they can't do on their own, what the state can't do on their own, the federal government has to be ready to supply. So this is subsidiarity. The larger community is not going to interfere in the inner life of the lower community, The lower community will do that independently, but they're going to need help. And when they need help, the larger community has to be ready. Even in St. Joe's University, we could talk about that being the large community. And we could talk about this classroom, 154, 10 o'clock, 10 course class section is the lower community. St. Joseph, the provost and the president are not going to be able to do what I need to do on the ground to deal with this class. But I can't do it on my own. Even this, the software for Zoom and everything else and the infrastructure that they provide is necessary for them to support me, but they should not interfere. I mean, unless I say something that's totally off the wall, the president and provost of St. Joe's University should not step into the classroom and say, no, hold on, we don't do that, right? So there has to be this interrelation between the two. That's subsidiarity. Solidarity then, and these are the big basic terms: common good, subsidiarity, solidarity. Solidarity, we said it before, is not interconnectedness, it's interdependence. What is one person's dependence on the other person in our world and in our lives? Again, COVID-19 shows us that, right? In other words, we're all kind of locked and sequestered in our homes, and we should think that we're not locked in our homes, we're safe in our homes, right? This is what we're trying to do, get over this. But we realize how those that might be carrying it, even unbeknownst to them, could affect other people. So it's something unseen that we see is in relation to other people. We're not just interconnected, we're interdependent. Well, we can think that way in terms of faith, right? Or we should think that way in terms of that, especially, something that the Catholic and Orthodox particularly hold this idea of the mystical body of Christ. And that what happens with one happens to it all. So it's almost as if, there's no way for us we can never have an individual relationship with Christ, which is why we have a religion. A religion is the thing, the etymology of it, is the thing that binds us together. So the religion creates the boundaries by which then we exist, and that we as a people come together, but we always come together as a people. The only way any religion could be individualized, the me and Jesus type attitude, is if Christ revealed himself entirely to you, which I've never met that person, or if I have, they were cult freaks, so we don't worry about them, right? So the whole point of this is if we don't develop a really sound understanding of Christian social teaching and how it applies to economics particularly, but other areas, of course, too, then we never have nothing more than this value of this vague compassion and shallow distress. It's almost like, well, what are you doing for the cause when posting something up on social media or on sending out a tweet? It gives you the sense that you're participating, but it's really not. I mean, anybody can do it. You don't even have any meaning behind it. So, if a person has concerns about immigration, when's the last time that you reached out to the community and either brought somebody in your house, or at the very least tried to give aid to others who could at least put up some refugee? Or if people are homeless, when's the last time that you spent time, sat down next to them, had a meal with them? If we have more money than we need, and most of us do, without the government taking away, when's the last time that we actually did something with it ourselves? And we don't have to be great. We don't have to worry about changing the world. You have an extra $40 and you're thinking about buying maybe a new t-shirt and going out and getting some from Chick-fil-A. Why not say, I'm not going to get the t-shirt, I'm not going to get Chick-fil-A, and I'm going to go and give this $40 to somebody I think that needs it. See, that's you deciding that, not the government. So this isn't some sort of communist plot, that type of thing. Which brings me to my last point, and then I want you to, have some questions and dialogue. We probably all heard this. I know I did when we were young, and you didn't want to finish your meal, and your parents said, if you don't, you have to finish your meal, there's starving children in whatever country they wanted to use at the time. And it never made any sense to me. Why is me finishing my meal any influx or input, or can have any sort of result on a person who doesn't have food? But that was never the point. It was I was trying to build a disposition. My mother was trying to build a disposition within me that you always have to be mindful of those that don't have. And if you can keep yourself, it's a psychological trick, but if you can keep yourself in that particular minefield, all right, you know what I mean? Keep yourself in that particular way of understanding, and you're going to do your best whenever you can to do have an opportunity. You're going to help someone else. So for instance, I try to keep my sneakers or my shoes outside, not in the rain, but out in the cold, at least during the winter. When I put them on in the morning, they're cold. It doesn't help the people that are homeless, but it makes me think about it. And just me thinking about it may not help anything, but it's going to change the way that I purchase things. It's going to change the way that I leave. It's going to change the way where I give money, because it's going to be constantly put in my mind. So it's almost like if we want to go back and talk about John Lennon's Imagine song, these things are important. And religion has a role to play in all these things. Religion has a way to bring meaning to individuals' lives. And even if it does, and many times it has, um, committed evils in the world, that's not enough to dismiss it any more than a particular person would do away with truth simply because so many people in our world lie. So, what do you think? What do you think of the figures? What do you think of the various statistics? Let me hear something.
This is Tiana.
Yeah, go ahead.
I thought the video we watched really opened my eyes to how the wealth is distributed throughout the country.
Yeah, and remember I said on what's today? Today's Monday. Remember I said on Friday about Ben and Jerry's, how they themselves said they would never make more than 9 times the lowest paid employee.
Hmm.
Still did very well.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like, so, but see what, and I'll, in full disclosure, because I try to stay very apolitical in this. Um, I would not be for a government going in and making that happen. I'm all for people like Ben and Jerry's, who are not Christian, by the way, as far as I know, did it on their own. Wouldn't that be cool, right? See, we're all going to have that opportunity. You included, me included, right? Good. I'm glad. What else?
Well, seeing that wealth distribution just reminded me of like sometimes we talk about how, the rich keep getting richer and the poor keep getting poorer and like potential ways to like slow that or stop that. And how like the idea of, oh, people to combat it will just try to like get rich. But that's like really hard, if not impossible, for some people because of like systemic racism or like family wealth that just like those top 1% stay the top 1%. And then the people who are like making pocket change, as they said, keep making pocket change because they can't invest and like grow their wealth.
Yeah,
Um,
you're absolutely
so
right, Dana. And when you have like 3 or 4 kids and you have two parents working and you're worried about paying the mortgage and the heat bill each month, everybody says, well, you could always put a little bit away. I mean, I hear these investors sometimes, and they might even be right. You could, even when I was in my poorest state, I was still able to put away $40 a week. You're never going to bring up that kind of wealth. I
yeah.
mean, I saw a statistic this morning. I was reading an article where if you made $2,000 an hour for 2,000 years, working 40 hours a week, you still were only like, in like the low billions. You still weren't even close to where these people are. I mean, think about that. So if we had made $2,000 an hour, 40 hours a week since the time Christ was born to today, we still wouldn't be in that group. I mean, there's something systemically wrong, right? So it's almost like, and we haven't gone into this, we might later, it's called like these systems of evil. In other words, these things get built up and we don't know how to break them down, but yet we don't, but there's something wrong with them. So, and you're right, you don't say, well, then if you don't like it, well, then do better on your own so that you can be in that group. You don't want to become part of the injustice that you're you know complaining about. So very good, Dana. What else? Anybody else? We still have a few minutes.
When I was looking at the living conditions, like the statistics, it kind of made me like think about how a conversation I had once with someone where we were talking about how like basically like someone's like I guess poverty or like someone's way of living may what we consider to be poor may be different from someone else's. So although we might live like say if someone would live in like in if someone wasn't able to afford rent, there's are people who are literally have no homes. So I feel like it's interesting if you were to compare different people, they would give you different definitions of it, and sometimes you don't take into account like the fact that there are people who have no form of education, people who are like in a sense earning $2 a day, and then um the fact that we all have to take into consideration that if we care about one injustice, we have to care about all of them in a sense because they all in a sense are tied together and they all have a interconnectedness where one affects the other.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. I had a friend. He had mental issues, and he had 4 kids, and his wife didn't work because she was taking care of either him or them, and they were living off of $15,000 a year that the government was giving them. And boy, if somebody would have went and told them, I only make $30,000 a year. Well, for them, that'd be doubling their income. They'd be like, oh my gosh, right? I didn't talk about it today, but there was a movement called the Focolare movement, and it's around now. So if you let's say that you're such an entrepreneur and you could wind up establishing a business and you're making a lot of money. I want to be very clear: the Catholic Church is not against making profit. If a business doesn't make profit, you're not going to be in business very long. I mean, you're going to go under. You have to, and you can't just break even every single week. It's what you do with the profit and how much is really necessary. So the Focolare movement says, run it like a business economy. They won't call it capitalism. Say run it like a business economy. And whatever your profit is, take a third and put it back into the community because they help support you. Take another third and put it back into business so that you can have some sort of, what do you want to call it, capital gain. And take the other third and give it directly back to the employees who contributed to this. So that way, there's not just an incentive, but everybody's benefiting, right? So the idea that it's not a trickle-down economics that, well, the people at the top, it all will trickle down, because it trickles down, but there's usually crumbs by the time it gets to the bottom. This does it in a different way. So I agree with you, Daniela. Anybody else?